I remember the exact moment my life tilted on its axis. My phone rang while I was halfway across the country, in an airport lounge, sipping lukewarm coffee, thinking about my next meeting. It was her. Karen. My stepmother. The woman who, for as long as I could remember, had a way of making me feel small, invisible, like I didn't belong anywhere. The moment I answered, I could hear the smugness in her voice, the cruel satisfaction of someone who believes they've finally won. "Emily," she said, her tone unnervingly casual, "I sold the house your father left you. I gave the money to Chloe. She deserves it more. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I must have looked like a deer caught in headlights, even though no one was there to see me. Sold the house. Gave the money to Chloe. She deserves it more. Every word felt like a hammer striking me over and over. The woman I had called stepmother had just taken what my father had left me, without a single thought, without a single conversation, without a shred of respect for me, his daughter. And she had the audacity to laugh about it. "You were never strong enough to keep it," she said next. Her voice wasn't just condescending, it was sharp, venomous, like she had been waiting for this moment for years. And maybe she had. Maybe she had counted every time I had tried to stand up for myself, every attempt I made to carve my own space in this family, and filed it all away as proof that I was too weak to claim what was mine. Too weak to matter. I didn't respond. I stayed quiet. I breathed in slowly and let the silence stretch. I let her assume that she had won, that she had broken me. Then, finally, I said, calmly, deliberately, "Thank you for calling." There was a pause on the line, a flicker of confusion that I could practically feel across the miles. My silence was deafening. It was the opposite of the reaction she expected. She had wanted anger, tears, a heated confrontation. Instead, she got nothing but calm, measured words, and the realization that perhaps she had underestimated me once again. She laughed nervously. "What did you just say?" she asked, disbelief creeping in. But I didn't answer. I hung up. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the overlooked stepchild. I felt like someone who had a plan. Someone who had power. Even from thousands of miles away. Let me take you back a little, so you understand why this was so devastating. My father, Richard Carter, had been the kind of man who left a mark on everyone he met. Generous, principled, with a love for his family that was enormous, but sometimes complicated. He had left behind a house. A place filled with memories, laughter, and sometimes tears. It was mine, in every sense that mattered. But after his death, Karen had subtly, persistently, made sure I knew I was always the secondary daughter in this household. Chloe, my stepsister, 20 years old, bright but spoiled and entitled, was her favorite. Every birthday, every milestone, every small achievement I celebrated was somehow overshadowed by Chloe's needs or her mother's manipulations. I had learned to bite my tongue, to smile through the subtle digs, to survive. But I never thought she would outright steal what was legally mine. And yet, here we were. I was halfway across the country, and my stepmother had just called to tell me that she had erased my inheritance like it never mattered. She thought she had me trapped. And maybe, for a moment, I felt the old familiar panic, that sense of helplessness I had carried for years. But only for a moment. Then, a strange clarity settled in. Because beneath the shock, beneath the sting of betrayal, something else emerged: resolve. If she thought she could outmaneuver me, if she thought that quiet, underestimated me could be dismissed forever, she was wrong. Dead wrong. I remember pacing the airport lounge afterward, my phone in hand, replaying every word, every laugh, every condescending inflection in my head. How had it come to this? How could someone be so cruel, so blatantly unfair? And more importantly, what could I do now? What could I do that she wouldn't expect, that Chloe wouldn't anticipate? I felt a spark, a mix of fear, anger, and something darker, sharper: anticipation. This wasn't just about a house or money. This was about reclaiming control, reclaiming respect, and maybe even teaching a lesson in the most satisfying way possible. And that, my friends, is where the story truly begins. Because what I did next wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no confrontations. No screaming, no accusations, no public humiliation. I waited. I planned. I observed. And by the time Karen realized what had happened, it was too late. But that's not something I'll tell you just yet. Before we get there, you need to understand the history, the relationships, the subtle betrayals and manipulations that led up to that phone call. You need to understand why this moment was the tipping point, the spark that ignited everything else. And let me warn you, the more you learn about Karen, about Chloe, and about the life my father built for me, the more shocking this becomes. Because nothing in this family is as simple as it seems, and nothing is truly what it appears to be. So, are you ready to step into this story with me? Are you ready to see what happens when someone underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed finally decides to take back what's theirs? Because trust me, what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The moment the call ended, I felt like my world had split in two. One side still carried the disbelief, the shock that my stepmother could be so audacious, so cruel. The other side, a quieter, darker side, sparked with a thought that had been dormant for years. Maybe she had finally underestimated me for the last time. I paced the small airport lounge, my heels clicking against the polished floor, the hum of travelers around me fading into background noise. My mind was racing, but every thought was calculated, every heartbeat deliberate. She wanted me to react. She wanted tears, anger, maybe even begging. I had given her nothing. And that silence was the first victory. Let me tell you a little more about Karen, my stepmother. She is 45, sharp, polished, and manipulative. She wears a smile that doesn't reach her eyes, a tone that sounds casual, but carries the weight of judgment. She thrives on control, on making others feel small, especially me. Ever since my father married her, she made it clear that Chloe, my stepsister, barely 20, pretty, spoiled, and naive, was the favored child. I had always been careful, always measured in my reactions, because Karen's anger could be explosive, quiet, or scathing. And yet, nothing had prepared me for this call. I remembered my father's house vividly. The sprawling living room, the sunlight through the big bay windows, the smell of fresh paint after he'd renovated the kitchen. That house wasn't just a property, it was a legacy. Every corner carried a memory, a fragment of the man who had raised me with love and care, the man who had made me feel seen even when the world didn't. And now it was gone. Sold. Like it had never mattered. Sitting down at the airport, I opened my laptop and started typing a list. Not an angry list, not a plan for revenge in the dramatic sense, but a map. Step by step, I needed to understand exactly what Karen had done. Where had the money gone? Which lawyer did she use? Did Chloe know it was coming, or was she just another pawn in Karen's game? Each question sparked another, and suddenly, panic was replaced by clarity. I thought about Chloe too. She had always been entitled, used to receiving handouts, to being praised without effort. She had a kind of naive confidence that made her oblivious to the emotional turmoil she caused. I wondered if she even realized what had happened, or if she was celebrating what she thought was a victory. That arrogance could work in my favor. People who think everything is easy, who think they can win without effort, often fall the hardest. As I plotted, my mind drifted to memories, small, almost insignificant moments that now felt like pieces of a puzzle. Birthday parties where Chloe got the lavish gift I had wanted, my achievements quietly praised but never celebrated, my father's subtle glances of pride quickly redirected toward Chloe whenever Karen was around. I realized that the call was not just about the house, it was the culmination of years of underestimation, of manipulation, of having my strength dismissed at every turn. Then I remembered the exact words Karen had said, "You were never strong enough to keep it." That line had cut deeper than anything else. But instead of weakening me, it lit a fire. Strength wasn't about yelling or confronting her immediately. Strength was patience. Strength was planning. Strength was winning quietly, without her ever knowing it was happening until it was too late. I took a deep breath, letting the tension settle into something like focus. I imagined the next few weeks as a chessboard, each move deliberate, each observation critical. And then I smiled. Not because I was happy about what she had done, but because I finally understood the game I was in, and more importantly, I finally understood that I had the upper hand if I played it correctly. I also couldn't help but laugh softly at the irony. Karen had always thought she was 2 steps ahead, that her control over me was absolute. She never noticed the quiet resilience I carried, the patience I had honed after years of being underestimated. And Chloe. She was the perfect distraction, the perfect pawn. Neither of them saw me as a threat. That, I realized, was my advantage. But just as I began to feel a sense of calm, a subtle fear crept in, the kind that makes you second-guess everything. What if Karen had done more than sell the house? What if Chloe knew more than I imagined? What if there were surprises waiting for me in every corner of my family's life? The uncertainty was thrilling and terrifying at the same time, and it only made me sharper. By the time I boarded the plane, I had made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't just react. I wouldn't chase anger or revenge in the obvious ways. I would wait. I would observe. And then, when the moment was perfect, I would reclaim what was mine, quietly, methodically, and with complete control. And in that moment, as the wheels lifted off the ground, I knew one thing for certain. Karen thought she had won. She thought I was weak. But she hadn't even seen the first step I was about to take. Little did she know, that first step would set off a chain reaction she would never recover from. And that, my friends, is where the real story begins. By the time I landed back in the city, my mind was already buzzing with possibilities. Karen had made her move, thinking she was untouchable. But she had left cracks, gaps in her plan that only someone who had lived in the shadows of her manipulation could see. I wasn't angry in the explosive way she wanted. I was focused, calculating, almost enjoying the irony. She believed I was weak, a quiet child in the corner, but I had patience. And patience, as I had learned, was more dangerous than rage. The first thing I did was trace the sale of the house. I reached out to the lawyer. Careful, casual, asking innocent-sounding questions about paperwork and property transfers. Every answer I received revealed small mistakes, oversights Karen hadn't thought I'd notice. It was almost beautiful, watching her plan unravel without her realizing it. I imagined her at home, smug and self-assured, thinking I was miles away and powerless, while I quietly collected the information I needed. Chloe, of course, was blissfully unaware. She texted me excitedly about the gift she had just received, completely unaware that the moment she was celebrating could be turned against her. She had always been the golden child, the one praised without effort, but this time, her naivety was part of the puzzle. People who think life is easy tend to make mistakes, and I was ready to exploit every single one. I spent hours digging through documents, bank transfers, even casual social media posts that Chloe had made. Every little detail gave me leverage. Every careless word or laugh became a piece in a strategy one was building. And as I worked, I couldn't help but reflect on how predictable Karen and Chloe had been. Predictable, arrogant, and careless, the perfect combination for someone like me, someone who had spent years learning to observe before acting. I thought back to my father. He had always told me that true strength often comes quietly, without the need for demonstration. I remembered the lessons he had instilled in me, the subtle ways he had taught me resilience and discernment. And now, years later, those lessons were my weapon. Karen had never really understood him, never truly understood me. She thought control was about domination, about immediate reaction. She didn't realize that quiet observation, careful patience, and strategic action could be far more powerful. As the days passed, I started planting seeds, small interactions with Karen designed to make her overconfident. I complimented her subtly, feigned ignorance, let her feel that her control over me was complete. Meanwhile, I was setting up the pieces of my plan. It wasn't revenge in the dramatic sense, it was precision, a slow and deliberate unraveling of everything she had thought she controlled. I also had to watch Chloe. She was unpredictable, impulsive, but not unintelligent. If she realized the plan early, it could all collapse. So I used subtle tactics to mislead her, making her believe that the money and house were hers for the taking, that the world had handed her a victory she didn't deserve. And in her celebration, she revealed things, habits, preferences, casual confessions that I could use. Every careless comment became fuel for the strategy. There were moments when the weight of the situation hit me. Watching my father's legacy manipulated, seeing the casual cruelty of Karen, feeling the entitled bliss of Chloe, it could have crushed me. But instead, it sharpened me. Every slight, every injustice became a tool, a motivator, a puzzle piece I could leverage. I found a strange satisfaction in the subtle irony. The very people who thought they were untouchable were giving me the keys to dismantle them. And then, just when I felt my plan was solidifying, I encountered a surprise. A detail Karen had hidden, something that could have complicated everything if mishandled. She had transferred the house sale through an unfamiliar channel, a small legal loophole she assumed I wouldn't notice. But I did notice. And instead of panicking, I smiled. Every obstacle was just another opportunity to be clever, another chance to show that quiet strength can outmatch arrogance every single time. By the end of the week, the trap was nearly complete. Every conversation, every gesture, every interaction was aligned to lead Karen and Chloe exactly where I wanted them. Karen believed she had won, Chloe believed her luck was endless. Both were blind to the quiet storm forming beneath the surface. And me? I had never felt more alive, more in control, more ready for the moment when the first domino would fall. The day I decided to make my first move was ordinary in every other way. I went about my routine, smiled at Chloe, spoke politely to Karen, acted as though nothing had changed. And then, when the timing was perfect, I set the first domino in motion. It was subtle, almost invisible, but I knew the effects would ripple through both of their lives. I didn't rush. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I just let the plan breathe, let it work, while they stayed blissfully unaware. And that's when it hit me, both the thrill and the danger of what I was doing. One wrong step, one careless move, and everything could fall apart. But the thought of waiting, of watching them stumble because of their own arrogance, made my heart race. By the time they realized what was happening, it would be too late. Little did they know, I had already started the chain reaction, and neither Karen nor Chloe could stop it. And just when I thought I had seen all their weaknesses, something entirely unexpected happened. Something that would force me to adapt, to think even faster, to prove that patience and strategy always triumph over brute arrogance. By the time the weekend arrived, everything was in place. Karen was confident, blissfully so. She strutted around the house as if she had already won, checking in with Chloe, bragging subtly about her superior judgment and completely oblivious to the fact that every move she had made to secure her victory had already been anticipated and quietly countered. Chloe, on the other hand, floated around the house like a queen on a throne she had barely earned, oblivious to the danger simmering beneath her feet. It was almost poetic. I watched it all unfold from my apartment, my laptop open, my phone close. My plan had been set in motion the week before, and now the pieces were moving themselves. There was something deeply satisfying about the way arrogance blinds people. Karen and Chloe both thought they had me cornered, that their combined confidence and entitlement could crush me before I even had a chance to react. But here I was, calm, focused, and fully aware of every little mistake they were making. The first step was subtle, a phone call to the lawyer who had processed the house sale. Casual, innocuous questions about paperwork, dates, and procedures. To anyone else, it would have seemed like routine administrative checking. But the lawyer, entirely unaware of my intentions, confirmed small but critical oversights Karen had made, incomplete filings, overlooked signatures, and a miscalculated transfer timeline. Every error was a potential lever. Every loophole was a weapon I could use. Then came Chloe. I knew she would flaunt her victory. She posted pictures on social media, showing off the money she had supposedly inherited, commenting carelessly about how lucky she was. And every post, every careless word, fed my strategy. She didn't realize that the moment she celebrated, she was revealing her patterns, her weaknesses, the things that would make my next move devastatingly effective. It was during one of these moments, scrolling through Chloe's posts, that I realized something extraordinary. She had always been reckless with details, always willing to flaunt her wins, and this time was no different. She wasn't just careless, she was predictable. And predictability, in the hands of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, was more dangerous than malice. I smiled quietly to myself. Karen had underestimated me all my life, and Chloe had been taught to expect that luck and favoritism would carry her through everything. But neither of them had accounted for the quiet patience, the observation, and the strategy one had honed for years. And that, I realized, was the most powerful advantage of all. The following day, I executed the first real part of my plan. I contacted a financial advisor I had worked with previously and quietly began unraveling the supposed transfer of funds. It was delicate, requiring precision and subtlety, because a single wrong move could tip Karen or Chloe off. I had to make them think that everything was still under control, that their victory was complete. And yet, behind the scenes, the leverage was building. Like a dam filling with water, waiting for the right moment to break. Even as I orchestrated the plan, I felt a thrill of nervous anticipation. There is something intoxicating about watching someone stumble because of their own hubris, knowing that every action you take is calculated, deliberate, and untraceable. I thought back to every moment Karen had ever belittled me, every time Chloe had flaunted her undeserved advantages, and I felt a strange sense of poetic justice. Not revenge, exactly, but a restoration of balance, a quiet assertion of what was rightfully mine. But the calm wasn't without tension. Every email I sent, every call I made, required careful timing. One misstep could unravel everything. I spent hours reviewing every detail, ensuring that nothing could go wrong. It was exhausting, yes, but also exhilarating. Every heartbeat, every pause in the day, carried the weight of anticipation. Then, late in the evening, as I was reviewing the final pieces of my strategy, I noticed something unexpected. A subtle shift in Chloe's behavior, a hint of suspicion, a tiny inconsistency in her texts to friends. She wasn't fully aware, but she was starting to notice the cracks in what she thought was a flawless victory. And Karen? She remained completely oblivious, laughing, smug, thinking the house sale and transfer had sealed her superiority. But the dominoes were set, and once the first one fell, there would be no stopping the cascade. I took a deep breath and leaned back in my chair. Everything was aligned. Every piece, every moment, every oversight on their part was accounted for. I had created a storm they couldn't anticipate, a plan that relied not on confrontation but on the quiet, inexorable logic of preparation. And as I looked out the window at the city lights, I realized something vital. Karen had no idea what was coming, Chloe had no idea how vulnerable she was, and I had never felt more powerful, more in control, or more alive. And yet, even with all that control, a shiver of excitement ran down my spine. Because no matter how carefully I had planned, the unpredictability of human nature still lingered. One wrong move from either of them could change everything. And that's when I smiled again, not with arrogance, but with certainty. By the time they understood what I had done, it would be too late. Too late to undo the damage, too late to reclaim what they had so arrogantly assumed was theirs. By the time Karen finally realized something was wrong, it was already too late. Every calculated move, every subtle observation, every careful manipulation had done its work. I wasn't angry. I wasn't screaming. I was calm, composed, and watching the consequences unfold like a perfectly executed symphony. The chaos wasn't loud. It was quiet, precise, devastating. And it all came from a place of patience, strategy, and knowing exactly what I was capable of. It started with the lawyer. The missteps Karen had made in the house sale weren't just minor oversights, they were legal openings. I had quietly contacted the firm, double-checked all the documents, and submitted requests that exposed the sale as invalid under certain conditions she had overlooked. Nothing illegal on my part, everything completely above board. But it forced a cascade of inquiries, calls, and delays that Karen hadn't anticipated. Her smug certainty began to crumble. Chloe, of course, was the first to panic. Her texts were frantic, her posts abruptly deleted, her calls ignored. She had believed the money and house were hers, that she had won without lifting a finger. Now she realized that the game she had thought she mastered was already slipping through her fingers. And the worst part? I hadn't even confronted her. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't needed to. The quiet inevitability of the situation was far more devastating than any shouting match could have been. And then came Karen. I watched her face as she finally pieced together what had happened, the confusion slowly turning into rage, and then fear. She had spent years underestimating me, mocking my quiet nature, dismissing me as weak. And now, in the very situation where she had assumed she held all the power, she was powerless. Her voice shook as she tried to call me, tried to argue, tried to regain control, but I didn't answer. I had already moved beyond her reach, already ensured that her influence over my life was meaningless. It was almost ironic, in a way. Karen had always believed control was about domination, about intimidation, about forcing reactions. She had thought strength meant aggression. But I had learned otherwise. True strength, I realized, was subtle. It was patience. It was observation. It was executing a plan flawlessly while letting others believe they were in control. And in that quiet victory, I finally understood the full extent of what my father had tried to teach me. Chloe finally confronted me in person, a mix of disbelief and desperation in her eyes. "Emily, how?" she demanded. Her voice cracked. She had always been confident, entitled, sure of her luck, but now, she was unsure of everything. And I looked at her calmly, with no malice, no gloating, just quiet satisfaction. "By paying attention," I said softly. "By noticing what you and your mother never thought I would." Karen stood behind her, fuming, still trying to assert authority, still trying to twist the narrative, but her words bounced off me. They had underestimated me, and that mistake would cost them both dearly. I had reclaimed what was mine, not through force, not through yelling, but through strategy and patience. And the realization that they were powerless against me hit them harder than anything I could have said. I took a moment to breathe, to savor the calm after the storm. This wasn't about revenge, it never had been. It was about justice, about restoring balance, about proving that underestimation is a dangerous miscalculation. I had been dismissed my entire life, made to feel invisible, overlooked, and weak. And now, for the first time, I wasn't just seen. I was respected, in the most undeniable way possible. And yet, even in this victory, I felt a quiet reflection. Power, patience, observation, these were tools I could use in the future, but they came with responsibility. The lesson wasn't about cruelty, it was about resilience, about knowing your own strength, about acting with clarity when others are blinded by arrogance. I had learned that the quiet ones, the underestimated ones, often have the sharpest edge. And in this family, I had sharpened mine to perfection. By the time they understood everything, by the time Karen realized she had lost control, and Chloe realized she had been naive, it was too late. The house was secure, the money intact, the power dynamics shifted irreversibly. And I didn't need to shout or argue. The silence, the calm, the precision of my actions spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. I looked at them one last time, both of them defeated in their own ways, and I realized something profound. Life is full of people who underestimate you, who assume your quiet nature is weakness. But quiet strength is far more formidable than anyone realizes. And in that moment, I knew that nothing, not arrogance, not manipulation, not entitlement, could touch me again, as long as I remembered the lesson I had learned. Patience, observation, and strategy always win. And so I walked away, leaving Karen and Chloe to comprehend their own mistakes, to face the consequences of their underestimation, and to realize that the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, are never as weak as they seem. By the time they understood, it was too late. And that, my friends, is the truth. Sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones that happen silently, the ones that unfold without a single raised voice, the ones that leave the world and those who underestimated you forever changed.